The consideration of race should be removed from the college admission process. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move. Okay. Well, I have to say, I've done this a bunch of times today at Dartmouth. Every single Dartmouth person has only moved after I've said moved. So that's already, we're already being quite impressive. Okay. So, why do you agree with the claim that the consideration of race should be removed from the college admission process? Tell everybody why.
I mean, I'd say, generally speaking, I'm a fan of removing race when it comes to considering anyone for an opportunity in general. I mean, that you should, I think, consider every applicant on a holistic basis. I think what programs that tend to try to group race into the decision-making process probably are trying to account for, systemic injustices or that sort of thing. I don't see why we would do that systematically when there are, people have all sorts of different privileges in life or disadvantages in life. I think an individual but holistic basis would be a good way to
So,
approach
so,
that.
so you think it should play some role?
I do not think that race specifically should play
Oh,
a role in
oh, okay. Do you agree with what he said?
I do agree with Mac. Generally, the way I grew up, most of what I've done has been completely merit based. And when you're coming into a school, and especially like a college, and you're coming here to learn, I don't think someone should be barred because of their race at all. Yeah,
Barred and or given special consideration.
correct.
Okay. Okay. Can you tell us why you strongly disagree with that claim?
Because ignoring the fact by ignoring race in admissions, you're ignoring the real fact that in United States society, different races are treated differently and systematically are discriminated against to get different opportunities. By saying that by putting everyone on an equal playing field, you're not accounting for the fact that the playing field is so very unequal. People who like people who have more are from better neighborhoods, who have better schools, who have access to better tutors, because this system has been systematically, or yeah, the education and housing systems have been built to systematically gentrify and alienate people who are not white, and specifically people of color.
Okay. Can you give everybody an example now so that we all know where you're coming from of a current example of systemic discrimination with regard to race, not gender?
Yeah. For example, we all heard about, or we've all learned about in school, the process of redlining, which was done in the 1950s and 60s to prevent African Americans from getting into better neighborhoods.
Is this going to go current? You're going to give a
Yeah.
current?
Today, redlining has been legally abolished, but gentrification as a policy and as a reality is still very much a thing. If you look at any city of reasonable size, and you look at the populations of African American people versus populations of white people and where they are, predominantly African American centers are farther away from centers of work, disproportionately leading them to have longer transportation times and less opportunity to work. They're put in districts that have statistically worse
Okay.
resources, etc.
So it's a legacy argument. Like the legacy of redlining is a inherent discriminator today.
No, it's that the economic system behind redlining, while it has been taken out of the legal code, is still very much built in to our economics, and any economic system that doesn't put limits to prevent that kind of economic abuse from happening.
And that translates into the college admissions process. Okay. Did he say anything that convinced you to move one line to slightly agree?
Not yet.
How politic. Did he say anything that convinced you to move?
No.
What kind of argument would you have to hear to convince you to move one single line to slightly agree?
Um,
That hopefully that he could make, but it's not on the onus isn't on him. Like, what would you need to hear? Piece of data, argument, body of evidence. What would that look like for you to move to slightly agree?
um, any argument that could conclusively show me that the only way to kind of remedy historical systemic injustices would be to introduce a modern systemic sort of discrimination versus considering case by case, what are the places where people are coming from, and then how do we account for that in the college admissions process?
Okay, so we're gonna see.
Mhm.
Oh, and one more thing. And if you were given that, would you move?
If you could show me that the only way to account for people's kind of privilege, if you will, would be to do it systemically rather than case by case, then I would move. Yeah.
Can you give him what it would take him to move one line?
I can try.
Okay.
I would say that the institutions that are in charge of college admissions are inherently built on a history of white colonialism, and this history necessarily has led them to, like, when you look at University of Chicago, or not Chicago, California, where they have done race blind admissions, where they have accounted for income but not race, you end up with distributions in class, or like in both specific majors but also in schools in general, of races that are so disproportionately white that it is
that true?
yeah.
Disproportionately.
Yeah, I think Dartmouth, which is pretty, like, not representative of the population, I think has something like I don't remember the
I
exact.
thought it was I could be totally wrong, but isn't it disproportionately Asian?
Perhaps also, but
Also.
specifically it doesn't represent the general population, because without building, not systemic discrimination, because that's a specific framing to claim that building institutional factors to
Okay.
correct for the real effect race has is in some way a discrimination of itself, when really it's correcting for something that already exists.
Got it. And so do you think that you gave him what he's looking for?
I gave him the closest thing, like the thing he was looking for was impossible, so I gave him what
Oh.
I
It was impossible. Why was it impossible?
What he wants me to say is somehow that this is a systemic race, or that this isn't that systemic racism is a problem, but that we should just solve it with other discrimination, which is inherently incorrect framing. Basically,
All right, hold on a second. Is that what you want him to say?
I don't think that's necessarily what would need to be said. I think, I mean, one issue I have with his framework is that when you're gonna kind of create a new system to counter this old system, it becomes very difficult to put kind of an end game in sight and a time to say, okay, well, we don't need this system anymore. Whereas if you are always considering it on an individual basis, and you're trying to look at, where are these people coming from? What's their specific background as individuals? And how far have they gotten given that? And how impressive is that to someone who started with more or less and got further or less far?
Okay, so I have two questions. So why aren't you guys on the strongly agree? Why aren't you on the strongly agree?
I'm not sure.
Well, you're welcome to move.
I think I will move.
Okay. Why aren't you on the strongly agree?
I think to be clear, I don't think decisions should be made using race ever, but I think,
Well, that right there.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. The
Okay. So we have a genuine difference of opinion here. Okay. So those guys changed their mind on the basis of why did you change your mind? I was going to say reason.
The reason I chose this line is because, what the question in part tries to get at least in modern discourse, or what I think affirmative action tries to get at in modern discourse, is disparity in starting point, and then thus disparity in end point. And then it tries to correct for that. So the reason I chose to stay on that line is because, I kind of agree with the sentiment of taking seriously there are disparities in starting point and ending point, and that perhaps it's just as impressive to end up, less academically,
Okay.
you know.
Okay. Are you willing?
Yeah.
Are you willing? And maybe he and I can do it, or maybe I can do it. I don't know. But if we give you good reasons, are you willing to move back to agree?
If you gave me good reasons.
Are you willing to move back?
I could do that. Yeah.
Okay. So so what if you had really good reasons? Are you willing to move to slightly agree? I mean, really good reasons to your satisfaction.
Yeah, if you could show me that the only way to correct historical systemic injustices would be
Okay.
modern systemic
Okay.
race-based decisions, then I will move that.
Okay, so just to be crystal clear, you're willing to change your mind on the basis of reason and argument and evidence.
Yes.
Also, yes.
Okay, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you willing to change your mind on the basis of reason, evidence, and argument to move to disagree?
I mean, yeah, if they had good reasons that actually the system that exists doesn't perpetuate systematic racism and we have no need for processes like affirmative action. I've heard no such argument.
But I don't
But
think
also-
that's their argument, though, right?
But also, furthermore, the fact that you just framed things that way clearly shows a bias on your part. You asked them questions. Oh, would you move this way? You never ask those questions to me to try and make them seem more reasonable. And then immediately went to the liberal person and was like, do you listen to logic and reason, trying to play at a stereotype that liberals are inherently more illogical, which I think
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did I ask him what it would take him to move to the disagree line? I thought I did.
nope.
Just now you just did, yeah.
No, you said you listen to logic and reason and move to disagree.
Okay, so then I apologize for the framing. I'll watch the tape back again. But what would it take you to move? I'm not saying I have the evidence. I'm not saying they have the evidence. I'm saying, like, what would that argument be like?
Frankly, I couldn't imagine an argument that keeps me in disagree but leaves me in that rather systematic racism is still a problem. This is still probably the best way to deal with it, but there is another way that might work okay, or something like that. Really, if what they want to do, which is if they provided sufficient reason, I wouldn't only move to disagree, I would agree with them. If you can give me good enough reasons to say this isn't a problem, I'll agree with you. I think those reasons don't exist. I think factually, when you look at how things are, when you look at the system of college admissions, which is predominantly run by predominantly white professors, that the people who are in charge of taking into account different people's lives is naturally going to be people who are more privileged, more white, and there is only one way to account for that, and that is because this is not a individual by individual problem. Racism is systematic. You can't solve a systematic problem with individual solutions.
All right, so let me say, so I apologize if I will ask everybody. I'll make sure to ask someone on the other side of the line first what it would take to change their mind. But I asked everybody, and if I did it the wrong order, then it's my blunder. Okay, so I just want to be clear. In 3 sentences, you're on. Do stand on the line, though. It's part of the rule. In 3 sentences, to move to disagree, what do either they need to? What do you need to see to move to disagree?
Just to disagree?
Just to disagree.
That systemic racism is still a problem. We still need to account for it in education somehow, but that there might be a more implicit societal way to do it instead of in education. Maybe that it is a institutional problem that's best served through other institutions, something like that. Because I would still have to not agree with them. I would just have to disagree with them a little less.
Okay. What if they said that and I'm not saying they're claiming this, I'm just throwing this out before we go to the next claim. What if they said, we're going to give everyone, regardless of race, a public education of the first rate and make sure that there's equal opportunity for all? Would you change your mind?
Simply, there is no equal opportunity without equal outcomes. Equal opportunity requires because how else do you measure the opportunity being equal? You didn't get equal schooling if you all went to the same school, but the white teachers gave the white students preferential treatment, they got better treatment and then got into better college. That's not equal. How do we measure if the society's equal? Well, by seeing what happens and being like, was it equal?
So I just want to make sure I understand this. So there's no equal opportunity unless there's equal outcome. Did I get that right? There's no equal outcome unless there's...
The only way to measure equality of opportunity is through the outcomes, is through equality of outcome.
Well, what about different cultures? I mean, what about different cultural traditions of Asians studying more than whites, for example?
To what degree is that a real thing or a thing that we enforce on society? And even if it is a real thing, that doesn't make equality of outcomes any less of a measure of that, just because they have a culture that somehow gives them more opportunities.
Well, that would show it's not systemic.
it is still systemic. Culture is a system. It's not just specific Asian parents being specifically more like studious than other specific white people. It is a culture that you are claiming is systematically doing something to.
Got it. So some systems then are superior to other systems because they produce certain outcomes, like kids getting into Ivy League schools.
No, that rather the system is built to differentiate people, to keep the people who are in power more likely to maintain power, instead of having a system in which opportunity is truly equal as measured by the outcomes, in which people of lower incomes are just as likely to be upwardly mobile as higher incomes. Because in reality, we know that upward mobility has been on the decline since the 70s, that et cetera.
Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a last word. Then I'm going to give you the last word. But I'm going to give everybody in the audience an opportunity to ask. We're going to take 3 questions before we go on to the next one. Anything you think that you could say? Anything you could either say to him or yourself about the move? Anything you could say about the proposition we're talking about?
I mean, I'd say I think you can probably measure equality of opportunity without. I think equality of outcome is a poor measure of equality of opportunity, because I mean people have innate differences in what their desires are to get out of life in general, and I mean if you could wave a magic wand and give everyone the same exact education growing up and give them all great parents, you'd still have people who chose to do different things.
But even then, you couldn't do it because people who are particularly short, they're not going to be as likely to be on a basketball team as tall people.
Right. So which is why I think equality of outcome is a poor measure of equality of opportunity for, I mean, yes, I suppose height literally could be one factor, but also just people want different things out of life. So yeah, I mean, I think there are better measures of equality of opportunity.
All right, I'll give you a word, 3 questions. I'm going to give him the last word.
No, I do agree with Matt. Like when I heard his argument, my immediate thought was like, if a friend of mine and I both studied for an exam, we're both given the same materials, and I just chose to study a little harder, does that our outcomes change a little bit, don't they? But I don't think that's a measure of like
a system. You're saying it's not a system.
I don't think so.
But what if your friend who studied harder? Well, I suppose it wouldn't be true if you're in Dartmouth. Okay, but what if it's another institution in which it wasn't an elite university? Couldn't you say that it's systems are responsible for that outcome?
Yes, I do agree that systems are.
So do you want to move?
Still no.
Okay. Before I give you the last word, questions. We'll take 3 questions from them. Hi, did you have a question for? Oh yeah, make you line up here, and we'll do 3 questions, and then we'll bop to the next one. Come on over, and say who you want to ask the question to, and we won't use any of his names, but strongly disagree, or 1 and 2 strongly agree.
Do you think that removing legacy could be a possible alternative instead of considering race?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Both must be done. Both are clearly racist, or both have elements of race institutions that need to be undone. Legacy admissions is clearly racist because the people who are more likely to get in the university in the past was even more disproportionately white than it is today. And that is clearly a problem. That being said, you remove legacy admissions, university admissions are still racist because the systems that produce university admissions are still racist, and you need to actually ensure equality of opportunity in education, and that measured in actual outcomes of education. And to the question,
we got to be quick.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Hi.
Okay, hi. My question's for this side, and I'm
Any 1 or 2?
either.
Okay.
And my question is, like, if the college is to be completely colorblind in the admissions process, do you see any like ramifications for perhaps implying that race isn't important or just is to be ignored? Like, what does that speak to if they're like defining races if it wasn't there?
Do anyone want to volunteer? You don't have to answer the questions, or you could.
I mean, the only thing I would say is like, I mean, yeah, I suppose that would send the message that race isn't important in the college admissions process. then again, I don't see why like that's the measure where we should be striving to go off of. So I would like again much prefer a system where you're looking at how far like what your metric is for does someone get into Dartmouth or something is what were your circumstances at birth? What have you done with them? And you don't have to end up at the same place for that to be an equally impressive calculus, right? Is the way I approach the problem.
All right, cool. Thanks. Next up. All right, just for you, we'll do 4. Just for you.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, I just want to ask, anyone can really answer this question, but probably like you two, really. When you talked about systemic racism, how about like unconscious and conscious racism as well? One example I can think of is race name biases. One of the reasons why you put our college IDs or like certain like exams, you put like certain IDs instead of your name is because of race name bias, where it just so happens that more ethnic sounding names are associated with certain ethnicities or races that were historically viewed to be less intelligent. How do we go about going against that if we were to eliminate consideration of race? Because you can associate certain names even like wrongfully with certain ethnicities and races.
I just want to make sure I understand that. So you're talking about not in a test, but in the admissions process.
Yeah, even in the business process.
And again, I just trying to be clear. So you're saying that if it were everybody had, their social security number plus 5 more digits, that in the admission process would be a way to take race out of it?
No, I meant like, how do we handle if race was taken out of it and still like race name bias? If you were to look, if there was no race,
There's
on the
no
paper,
names, yeah.
there was no, but just if there was names, you can associate certain names with certain ethnicities, and biases can come from those negative or positive associations with those names.
Isn't that just a logistical problem of figuring out how to do it when you take the names out of the admissions process, or no? Am I missing the question? I am missing the question. Okay, hopefully you guys.
Oh, no, I mean, I understand it the same way you do. Like, if it were just a number, right? You're taking the name out of it, it's more holistic, isn't it?
Is that I'm missing the question? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, like, yeah, but there are names on the applications. Like, how do you just, yeah.
So I mean, yeah, the way I would prefer to go about it would be to, redact the names, assign, in the admissions process, someone submits an application, their name is whatever, they get assigned some, 5-digit number instead. I would be totally fine with the system where you're looking at candidate number 2043 instead of Matthew, whatever.
Okay.
That'd be
Okay. Yeah, and then we got to move on. Last one.
While that might be a way to remove the name process in the admissions itself, people of color were dealing with that every step of every educational process they've ever gone through. By the time they made it to the admissions process, they've already experienced that kind of discrimination in every aspect of their lives, and that's what you need to account for. Furthermore, removing names makes it so people whose story is about striving through that adversity are put at a disadvantage by admitting that they are from a race that isn't white. Also, they ask you your race. So it's like there is that in there as well. But saying, sure, they should remove that to get rid of race, again, ignores the fact that racism is an institutional part of our society that you can't ignore just by saying it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, I said 3, but we'll do 4 and then we'll go to our next question.
Thanks. So this is a question for Jordan. So one of the major examples of systemic racism you gave was redlining. And I know there's a lot of colleges that are now moving more towards considering class and economic background and less so race. And I was wondering if you saw colleges take into consideration classism more, if you think that maybe they should take into consideration race less. Since
you mean like the Obama's children or Jaden Smith or something like that?
I guess that would be one example, but I guess another example of horribly disenfranchised people in our society are poor white people who are subject to also really horrible injustices in the history of our country. And I feel like they should be given recognition of this in the same way as people of minorities.
It's not one or the other, it's both. We have to account for class, and I think a lot of colleges already do to some extent, but they don't do to the extent that they should because they get more money if your parents have more money. That should exist. It doesn't. But that even if you account for that, there is a thing that African Americans have had to experience in this country that a white person of the same race has not, which is is systemic discrimination in every part of their lives and every part of their existences up till this point that have made their lives significantly harder and made it much more unlikely for them in a quote like race blind state to ever have a chance to get to the places that people who have more opportunities will. And the only way to ensure that kind of equal opportunity is by measuring it in terms of the outcomes in those communities, because sure, there are variations in people, but it's not large.
All right, cool, thanks. All right, everybody, give him a round.